Welcome to the J3U University podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and deliver the highest level of competitors to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. What to do between prejudge and finals. Sometimes you nail it in prejudge. You're like, oh my gosh, I just have to do this again at finals. Or you blew it in prejudge. What do you do to make up the ground in finals? And I know for some you might think, man, all the judging is done in prejudge. Like it doesn't matter what happens in finals. That's not always the case. And also you kind of need to represent yourself well too. And it's just another way to keep practicing for once you move up to the advanced level. So I don't think it's something to absolutely just write off at all. Even if you're like, I was in the last call out, my prejudge, like I'm just going to go eat some donuts between finals. That's my protocol. I think you should still try to revamp and see what you can bring. So Luke and I are going to talk about what do you do after prejudge and lead into finals to improve that look, or at least hold it if you nailed it.
Yeah. And I think one caveat to that as well, just to add to that list, is like, I've been to plenty of regional shows where the outcomes didn't fully represent where the call outs finished, right? Like the person in the center was not who ended up getting first. So, you know, some regional judges like to move people around, give people stage time. And so it ends up not being fully exactly kind of how they call people off stage. And so like you can think you're in third and then go do that stuff between prejudge and finals, end up winning the class and kind of ruin your chances for the overall. So, in fact, 2 years ago, I had a girl win the overall. When the final call out, she finished on the end for the overall. Right. So they were just moving them around and comparing them to different people. So yeah, it's important to understand that. But then I think like when we look at the initial assessment piece, what was the stage look is always the first question to ask. For coaches that aren't there in person, that's almost always the first thing I ask when people get off stage is like, do you have photos of you on stage? A lot of times there's a family member or a friend that's taking some photos. I can kind of see how they compare next to the other people in their class, because that's going to start to guide the decision-making of what needs to happen moving forward. And then the second piece of that assessment for me is getting back and getting a weight to see how far they've kind of dropped from that initial look that we put on stage as well.
Yeah, like those are absolutely things that we need to try to do. I also like to speak to the athlete of what was their perception of how it went and any hiccups along the way, just to see like what their mental state was going into the show. Because for when I've been in person, of course, not in person as well. And I've looked at someone literally before they walk backstage to do their glazing and pump up and whatever. Then they come out and I'm like, this is not what I just looked at. And there's no way what I did would have changed that stage look. Yeah. And it's someone that could be hyper stressed and get really anxious or overexcited, and they start burning through carbs, water starts going as well, and they come out stage and they could be really flat, and they're like, oh man, just didn't have enough in place. It's like, is it you didn't have enough food fluid in place, or was it more so we need to work on the mental aspect of going into that stage state? So I like to ask them, like, how did it go? It's like, oh, it was a mess backstage. I was a wreck. Like I didn't have time to pump up. I didn't do this. You're like, all right, maybe this should weigh a bit into the look some, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's even further testament. Like when you are in person and stage, like backstage patches can be so expensive, but it is worth it a lot of times to try to manage that environment, because so much can happen in that last 30 minutes and change a look. And so
all of a sudden the expediter's your coach, right?
Oh man.
You hear that? Like, time to pump up, no time, get glaze on, come on, line up. and like, I was at one show with an athlete backstage, and like she heard that, she like jumped up, like, you know, she was a female with her big roller bag, like pulling stuff out. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, he said to line up and pump up, like we're going. Like, you have so much time left. Like, just chill. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to tell you when we need to go. She's like, oh, okay. And she chilled out. So like, you know, those expediters, man, they can push you and they can make it get really stressful quick. Like you're running out of time, when in reality, you're not running out of time. So I even as a side note, like as a competitor, I've always like tried to have access to where I could look on stage and be aware of the timeline, but at least now it's been pretty good with like they have videos backstage or text alerts of who's going on. So,
yeah.
or even buy the live stream on your phone and watch it as you're chilling backstage.
Yeah. And that's like people who use muscle wear too. That's fun when shows have like muscle wear that like gives the live updates and everything. But yeah, I think a lot of that is kind of pre-show, like you're doing that. You ask the client kind of how they manage that. And we're going into that prejudge to finals. I think you really just need to address the hydration situation first. And a lot of that's going to be kind of dependent on where the stage look is at. It's assuming you nailed it and the weight dropped down a bit. The first thing I'm doing is plugging in a bit of fluids to start to get the hydration status back in play, and then hopefully food pretty quickly afterwards, to start to try the process of feeding them to hold them. And this is where that data from the test peaks is really important, because when I build these out for athletes, like I have food and fluid amounts kind of preset that are, pulls athlete up a pound, holds athlete where they're at, or pulls athlete down a pound as far as like lack of fluids or lack of food. And so you're able to really quickly kind of based off where they walk off stage, decide how much further you have to push that athlete, and then start that process of hydration and feeding kind of pretty quickly.
Yeah. A good example of this would be now a few weeks ago. Josh Bridgen was on stage, and they worked him out there. It's a pro show. So, guys are starting to get sweaty, and also it was his like classic pro debut. He was amped, right? And he came off stage amped and riding this high. And he's like, man, I was really shaking a lot out there. It's like, yeah, it's like the nerves and the excitement of it all, right? But just through all that, like, man, it pulled him down quite a bit. And so we ended up putting like about almost 16 ounces of fluid back in, because his weight, like right before he went out, I had this data, and that was a solid look for him at like 100, like a little over 105 kilogram, and then came down to like 104.5. So I know how much I need to put in fluid wise, first hydration, because that's quick to get him back in, rather than put food in. And why I'm going to get to this in a second is because also someone can be so amped post show that that sympathetic drive is so high that the food's just going to sit there. So what I like to do is put hydration in first, because that will absolutely be able to be utilized, but I want them to get back to a relaxed state so we can have good digestion take place. So like for his example, I'd say, hey, let's put this fluid in. When you calm down and you feel a little bit of hunger signaling, like send me a message and let me know. Now there's the other case. And how many times have you heard this, Luke? I'm starving. What's my next meal? Like, get out of here. Like, there's third world countries, people are starving. You got off a bodybuilding stage. Like, you're not starving. Come on.
Oh, man.
But I know hunger signaling can go like sky high for some people. And so consideration point, you might not need to wait for everyone, but fluids come first. Then from there, I like to address like, what is the mental game plan from here? So some people want their feedback right away. Some people don't, and that might be a detriment. But I also want to make sure that we, control the environment going forward. And some people want to like right away jump on social media, look what people are commenting, look at their stage pics, and that can lead to a spiral or a buildup. But what I would say is like, hey, disconnect and just enjoy the moment that you're in, and don't let that, cause anything negative happening around more stress to your look. Then also just setting yourself up to be relaxed, get your feet up. Like, let's get back to that type of state, to where for one, we're not having to drive so much food in, but you're in a point now to start the eating process.
Yeah. And I think a part of this too, cause like I'm the same. I plug in hydration first typically, and then I have like a 30 to 45 minute window where I'm like, hey, we'll eat in about that time frame and then go from there. One of the big things that I like to address too is the assessment piece from the client, especially with clients who might not be the most accurate at giving the assessment piece. How many times have you gotten this feedback of like, I felt good on stage, but I didn't feel as full as that training session 1 or 2 days ago, right? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, the metabolite buildup and the amount of cell swelling that's going to occur from resistance training is not going to happen from a pump all on stage. It's not what we're doing here. We're trying to put the best look on stage. And you get that feedback, and then you get the photos of them on stage, and they're like blasting full, like peak to the gills. And you're like, you can't look at these photos and tell me that you weren't full. And I think this is important to understand. Like another reason why I do the peak testing is to understand how the client communicates to me feedback on how they feel in relative to their visuals. And this is a big thing that I'll communicate to them as well now is like, hey, like the pump that you get from resistance training is not the same pump we're trying to emulate on stage. Like it should come quick. You should get some blood flow, feel a bit fuller, but it's not the same. And I think that can skew, especially coaches that are earlier on in the process of learning how to coach, it can skew their ability to make an objective decision. So I do think it's a piece to assess coming off stage for prejudge of like, you're asking them their opinion, but also take it with the grain of salt of like, how have they given you feedback throughout the prep and through testing?
Yeah, that's definitely a good, strong point for your judgment, because most people are like, yeah, I couldn't get a pump. And actually it was on par, right? It's just that their pump meter at 10 is going to be like after a refeed and in training. And so you to go on stage like that and pose round after round, you wouldn't make it, or you're so pumped you can't even get into your poses. Like that's how I'll get like a side try. Like, man, I would praying for life that it was held for a short period of time. So I think that's for one, it'll help you a lot of times set that expectation up, and why I think doing a practice pump up the day before the show of what you're trying to emulate in that, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I can feel the muscle squeeze, and it's like a 5 out of 10 pump. Like that's probably how you should be going on stage. Like you can feel the contractions, but you're not exploding full. Like you're going to like flex a muscle. It's going to pop off. Right. So set the expectations up. But anyway, the feedback piece will be important, but it's relative just to the client's experience level, but that's a coaching piece for you too. So don't get frustrated with your clients for like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's saying like, I didn't nail him for the show. Like don't go to the defensive, just think of it as personal. Just someone that's naive and needs to be help guided so they can give more accurate feedback. So that is your coaching responsibility here. And once we move past that piece of addressing like that food can go in, and based on your previous data, could be from your practice peak data. I have the most data just from like the plan that we were running the days prior, and having like visuals and meals laid out and all their weights, so I can look back and know, all right, this amount of food brings them up this amount. And so that's what I kind of pre-planned off, hey, how much someone pulled down. Do I want to maintain that? Well, I know the food amount that was maintaining them the day prior, but I also know the food amount that would push them up a little bit more if I needed to. And you're like, well, I got to nail this perfectly. And I understand that you're looking for these exact ratios of how to do it. And we have some guidelines in J3U, but again, it's like put a meal in that's consistent and then just reassess. Like that first meal, the next one you can adjust and you will have it down for if you need to hold them or you need to bring them down or anything off that. So like we can use Josh's example last, I was doing around 135 grams of carbs and 10 grams of fat, like every meal, relatively the same food sources. So it makes it really easy from here. I just kind of coach meal by meal. And to hold him, I can start just scaling back food. So I can drop him like 100 grams of carbs, same fats, and cut fluids in half. And that would hold him. And that's kind of like a good starting point. And I would just tell you like the fluids go the farthest as far as trying to hold someone. So being more restrictive in fluids is at least a better initial start, because fluids will go very far as bringing someone's weight up. Especially if you like look at them and post stage is actually a better look. Like they look harder and tighter, and maybe they're a little lighter. You're like, okay, this is actually better. We want to probably not put as much fluids in then, versus the person that was like nailed pretty solid. We're just trying to hold them. That other person might have been just like a little bit softer in stage, and that improved hardness look is kind of what we're going for. And it's be best to like compare back to their same hotel room pics that they sent you. Maybe over the stage pics, even if you have that kind of data, and maybe you don't have stage pics and they're not as accurate. Just look off the last like standardized pics that you had from the hotel and see if the look's improved or if it's worsened. Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3 University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3 University. Let's get back to today's podcast.
Yeah, I do think, like, especially with the excitement that shows can bring, like, how that environment is between shows is pretty important too. Like, their surrounding environment of the people that are coming into the room to visit, and like the time that you have to yourself. It's kind of dependent upon what, energizes that client, right? But I do think that having that relaxation space and kicking your feet up, potentially planning to nap if you have enough time, is like huge for kind of riding that wave down from prejudge into finals. Once you've finished like the food and fluid, like kind of implementation, like there needs to be time to like get off the feet and relax and start to bring down that as much as possible, that sympathetic drive between shows for sure as well.
For sometimes someone that improves from prejudge to finals, like that's the biggest piece to it.
It is, yeah.
And you might look at, say, like, oh, well, what do I need to change with food and fluid? It's like, it's not food and fluid. It's how you manage yourself environment wise and mental wise. Mm-hmm. So, and that can come with a lot of mental training. It's kind of getting to like the psychotherapy side around competing and trying to have like visualization and positive self-talk leading into these shows, to where when you do get for prejudge, you're not in an overly anxious or nervous place. You have the right level of excitement present. And that's not skewing your look, because it definitely can. And a lot of people will improve from prejudge to finals, not off the protocol necessarily, because you can only do so much if you have someone that's extremely anxious and nervous. So a lot of times, like, hey, if that's the client you had, it's working on that piece, because that's likely why they improved into finals. Now, there is the other one around, right, where someone does improve for finals, and maybe it's someone that needed a longer period of time of lower fluid and food going in. And so when you see that happen, it's, well, how do you kind of reverse engineer that timeline, right? So if they got up to their best look earlier, and then were able to hold that, and that's when they started improving, it's like, well, maybe we need to scoot that back to where we start them a little bit earlier in the morning, get them up to that look, or we feed them a little harder the day before, so they don't wake up so light and have so much ground to catch up. We feed them till they wake up pretty close to the stage look, and then they can just stay low fluids and just some maintenance food into that show. So that's just shifting that timeline backwards to emulate what you saw was the best version on finals. Now, that's a great idea, but again, there's a lot of variables present on a show day. So that's why you really need to tease out, like, is it really the food fluid piece that was there? Or was it really just the client's psychological side that needs to be addressed? Do you have anything to add on that before I kind of get around the posing section?
No, I think that's the next piece to discuss is the posing portion of like how much you're posing through the day and some other things around those lines.
Yeah, I mean, as far as man, I've had people like one day out do like full on 30-minute posing sessions with their posing coach, which that's a terrible idea. But at least after prejudge, like, look, it's not the time to like go through rounds of posing. Like, you already did that. It's just time to rest and recover and take your check-in picks. But the posing thing around here is trying to gauge how much you want to try to improve someone's posing between prejudge and finals if they left something on the table. And a lot of clients are like, well, how did it go? What do you think? And, be positive about the things that they did really well. And you really have to gauge the client on how much do you want to start already giving them their critiques. Some people, it's not positive as far as for their psyche going into finals, and some people it's beneficial. So it's like, just takes you need to know the athlete of like, when's the right time to give that. For the athletes, like, hey, I think you can really improve to finals. And this is the things that we can do and take action on now. And I think that's how you need to word it to make it a very positive, uplifting aspect, not like, hey, you really messed up on these poses. We have to fix this. Like that has a really, the way you say that has a really negative connotation around it. So, hey, these are things you did great. Man, I really think we can improve finals if we did XYZ. Check this out, you know? And so with that being said, it's also like, it's a lot going on that between prejudge and shows. So don't do major overhauls to your posing. It's just not going to stick. So it's simple little things, maybe for just a couple poses, and that's it. So if you can get them like, hey, your elbows were too high, just like bring them down a little bit, your front double, like that's enough for that pose. Maybe it's like, hey, you're on your lat spread, your shoulders were lifted too high, bring those down a little bit, and then we leave it at that. You know, so it's how much can you really give to that athlete to make changes and not overwhelm them either. But those are some of the big areas where we could go into finals and make some improvements to where, you know, it's funny because absolutely we want the outcome right, like a good placing, but no matter if you're going to be last call out or first place, what you're really left in the end of the day with from after the show to 20 years from now is going to be stage picks to look back on. Yep. And it is so disappointing to have a pose that you hit so just terrible. You're like, what was I doing? So even making those corrections are so worth it for the future you to look back on and be really proud of what you brought to stage. So it's something that definitely you should try to improve on between those shows. And nowadays, like, man, these pictures last forever and they're all over the internet. So it's not like how it used to be if maybe they were just in magazines or certain outlets. Like every show's plastered everywhere. So you really want to make sure that you are nailing those for at least for yourself. But that's at least managing the posing piece and things that can be done around it.
Yeah. And I think one thing too is like, I typically keep like a 2-pose rule, like, only 2 poses am I going to give feedback to potentially adjust, because when you're starting to get beyond that, that's like work that needs to be done in the time between shows, right? Like if there's a second show, like we need to set up a practice schedule in order to fix that. But then it's like, once you kind of addressed all of these and you're kind of getting into finals, I love doing one show before a second one for this reason, is like how to manage the time between shows. Because when you get onto the final stage, that's really your best assessment piece of how you manage that previous time frame. And I think that's probably like the last piece to kind of cover in regards to like bringing the look to finals, and then what do you use that for from there? Because I've certainly changed how I've managed time between shows from regional to pro qual. And that's why, like, even people that I have qualified, I'll often ask them to do a regional just so that we can tease that out and try to, because it's hard to replicate a show day otherwise.
Yeah, it's your own unique thing. And on that piece around like trying to improve, I know you get off stage and you have your picks and you're sending them to your friends, and probably friends that are supporting you along the way that probably also have tough time biting their tongue as well. It's like, oh man, he looks like you, like, what do you think? And that's the friend that'll tell you like, hey, you looked like this on stage. And I would just be cautious with that, and also letting it lead you to the wrong opinion of your coach, because there's just so many variables that are present. And also a lot of people are very inaccurate looking at stage picks versus looking at picks that were off stage. And it's just so skewed. Even with a client, like their look from their hotel room into their backstage with terrible lighting, all of a sudden they look really washed out and flat, but they're at the same body weight. However, like, you know, we've trained through experience to know like how lighting and things will change. And we've looked at these athletes in these different lighting situations too. And we also understand stage lighting of what that's going to be representative of what we see off stage. A lot of people don't. If you watch all these bodybuilding media channels, they're judging everyone off stage picks at various different shows and like, oh man, you see how so-and-so nailed it at the Chicago Pro? They look so hard, when they have like a beautiful stage setup and awesome video versus maybe some other show with terrible setup with poor quality, videography being done, and that's your stage picks. You're like, man, they missed the mark there. And that's probably how they're going to do it their next show. It's like, no, like most of these people don't know what they're looking at to be able to accurately say how that actually response during the peak was from off stage to on stage. So, let your coach be the person you have these conversations with first to help you build your understanding. Don't feel like those are questions you can't ask, and just come from extremely, humble place of trying to look at, hey, this is how I looked before. Like, how come this is how it looks on stage? Like, what is the changing on the lighting like doing to the pics, or is there something that I can improve on to look better? Put it on yourself of asking your coach to where you're not trying to blame them. And you can't have those conversations with your coach. I think that's when it's starting to be a problem. But I would say at least give your coach the chance to have those conversations around where can we improve. And as a coach, we all do these things like, how can I keep improving this athlete? It's not time to jump ship yet. But if you have a coach that's like, hey, I know how we can get better, and these are the things in the areas they are, perfect. If you have a coach that's like gets on the defensive and doesn't want to give you those explanations, that's someone that might not be willing to try to improve upon your stage look, and being able to, look into their own coaching protocols or evaluate you appropriately to be able to improve you on stage. So, assessing all the stage picks, it can be quite convoluted. So again, it's this managing your environment, the social piece around who you're asking your opinions from, and maybe between prejudge and finals, we don't want to send picks out to every person, especially that person that might be a little bit harsh and inaccurate in being harsh.
Yeah, I think that probably wraps up kind of like the whole piece of like how to manage that prejudge to finals. I think it's probably one of the hardest places to hold a look, especially like if you nail it at prejudge, like, and it's so important to the higher level athletes, like the pros and the people going for pro cards. Cause like finals is such an important aspect of that process. Like it's such a thing to make sure that you nail.
Yeah. I did have a question pop on the forum. They're like, how can someone get worse into finals and look just like softer? And yeah. I don't know the context behind where that came from, but I would also say, for one, from a coaching side, like you need to make sure you have like everything very accurately laid out for your athlete to where no mistakes can be made just incidentally. But also be aware that it's an emotional experience on show day, and that could send someone, that starving person off stage, to add in a little extra than what you had on plan. So if they're overeating or overhydrating, it absolutely can make someone softer on the stage. Or maybe the other person for some reason got like really stressed into finals. Maybe they had an argument. I don't know. Who knows, right? But usually I would always just have that in mind, that could be the issue. So someone could get worse. But other than that, I think that gives a pretty good framework of thought around, what to do, what to manage between prejudge to finals. And if you need to learn more about this, you check out our contest prep module, and J3U level 1 is extensive, and we cover every bit of detail that we discussed here today and even more. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.